So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the Aurum feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Hamashiach laid waste from many centuries. As we read it in Yeshayahu the prophet, there are many links with Yeshayahu and Daniel, and Daniel 11 truly shows on the reflected side of the given prophecies understanding and flow of events regarding then the layers linked with military, also trade, and tabernacling. So Daniel mostly was the minister of finances under many kings during his time of service. And then Daniel, in this particular chapter, is explaining what's going on during the time of the restoration of tabernacling. And the layer of tabernacling is mostly explained by Ezekiel regarding then the refurbishment of tabernacling, or then the tabernacle of Moses. Now then, what does it say regarding what's coming as far as the military layer during this time of the restoration period? Daniel is very clear. He explains on chapter 10 on the reflected prophecies regarding then the kingdom of China. Obviously, the events, they are precisely as they were during the geographical area given by the prophet. Later on, during the restoration period, only the geography of these prophecies change. The events remains. So then, it states very clearly regarding then the kingdom of the north, and then a very particular word in Hebrew known as Netzer or Netzer. Very important Hebrew word because it's related with the olive plant. When it cuts down and the ramification under this great system, then many years later comes out a sprout. That's where then in the tabernacling language is related with the lineage of David. Then later on the Hamashiach ben Yosef. But we are not talking of this particular understanding of tabernacling. We are speaking of directly with the Gentile level in a military layer. So then the kingdom of the north then shalt come, and then there is this Netzer explaining then what went on previously. Now these particular prophecies mostly were explained by Yeshayahu the prophet, known as Isaiah. And unfortunately, a lot of documents from Isaiah were destroyed because there are a lot of sections of Isaiah does not have a complementation. It's not completely given the entire details. However, we know that some of them are included, but then the details of each layer then is solely lacking. And because of other prophets then explained sections of these lacking portions during the time of Yeshayahu, then it is somewhat easy of placing these sections together. So then it explains then this sprout that comes out from the previous system. Now, kingdom of the north, simply Daniel is explaining of a later on during the time of the restoration, and quite honestly I highly doubt that he was involved with these layers, but on a reflected portion of it, he might have had an idea what was taking place in the future of the prophecy itself. But truly, it's highly doubtful that he knew that these events would be involved then much later, when the angel said, shut the words of this prophecy because it's for the time of the end. And the events so intricately related with each other. He knew that these prophecies were taking place because he knew the future of the primary objective of these writings. But there was also a reflection for the time of the restoration, and he does not mention any other details, so it gives us very important clues that he did not know regarding these prophecies on a reflected mode. So then, as far as these Netzer, we are talking very precisely of the socialist section. So then, if you read these from the Greco-Roman translation, you won't ever understand it. Firstly, because the Greco-Roman translation is wrongly translated. A lot of words, they don't match. And the very spirit of the Greco-Roman translation is simply reads in a flat surface. You are reading what you are reading and you don't understand the rest of it. In Hebrew, however, changes, because future in Hebrew is directly related with the past. So if you want to know what the future holds, it's not this black void space awaiting for God to come in and show them the future. No, they have to understand the scripture previously, so then the future then is already given. So amazingly, the end of the world was already given by the time then Yeshayahu was around. 700 years before the coming of the Hamashiach ben Yosef, the entire scripture was already given, and the end of the world and so on. So the entire instructions regarding then the time where they were writing these scriptures until the very end was already given. From our time, at least 2,700 years ago. Now then, there is a way of reading it. There is a way of understanding it, and there is a way of layering them. So then, on the 7th verse of the 11th chapter, there is a Hebrew word there, 534.2 lexicon. So you find then the mem, you find nun, you find then the tzadi and the resh. So then these indicates, in the language of military, a system, a military system adopted previously. Because then later on we find another portion of these military layer related greater than the former. So there is a direct link in Hebrew of both of these layers. Now then, it states, then the kingdom of the north and shalt come with a greater host than the former. So very clear, and the understanding is obviously, when a person understands the Hebrew language, he must have some knowledge of military, some knowledge of trade, and obviously the knowledge tabernacling. So then, during these days of the restoration period, and that's where then most of these chapter is related with, and is linked up with Revelation chapter 1:8. That's where it's at. Both of these are linked, the 11th chapter and the 18th. And as you understand, Revelation was not recorded in chronological order. Only truly a stupid person reading Revelation, understanding chapter 2 is after chapter 1, and then chapter 17 is before chapter 18 is ridiculous, because that's not the way the Hebrew language is given. Prophecies, they do not have verses and they do not have chapters. You have to understand the content and then the structuring that comes from Vayikra, or then Leviticus, the 23rd chapter. There is always structurized in each of those portions, depending on the layer they are speaking of, they group together with other sections. So during this time of the restoration period, mostly after 2008 and 2009, until prior of the autumn feast, and obviously a person with a bit of knowledge understands that a couple thousand years has gone by until the time that these prophecies takes place in the very near future. So thus you're 1,000 years given to Nahashatan, 1,000 years given to the Mashiach, so those couple thousand years are gone. It's a simple mathematical calculation. Now there is only a time of the restoration of tabernacling, and then the other layers of trade and military coming together, and then the end in the autumn feast, and that's about it. So then, as far as the Kingdom of the North, everybody already knows that's the Soviet Union. The greater than the former is the great system of the Soviet Union previously. Mostly people that study, they understand who was Nikita Khrushchev, they understand the powerful status of the Soviet Union, and that's precisely what Daniel is explaining. Though Daniel did not know during his time that it was going to be some sort of Soviet Union, but he knew that it was a section in the northern part that are going to develop a system, and this system later on is going to be reused. So then, the Soviet Union is back, and the Cold War is back, as it was back then, however, this time greater than the former. So while our president is playing CEO with our government, let's make sure then we understand that the Soviet Union is truly preparing itself for then the protection of the world's trade. It is an entire situation developing, and the denial of the president, we are no longer in a Cold War, and he simply doesn't understand. He's from some sort of church there, they don't study the Hebrew language, they don't understand the scripture, and therefore it's simply denial. It's not a river in Egypt, but that's maybe his definition of denial. However, regarding the position of the Soviet Union, the Cold War is back. And he doesn't know how to handle it. He only thinks it's, some sort of a friendship going on, and, they have their ways and we have our ways, and he does not have any plans for the Soviet Union. He doesn't have any plans for the Soviet Union, but the Eternal does. That's what very plainly stated in his own word. So then, and then later on, he's coming with a greater army and much equipment. So there is a line of understanding that the Soviet Union is back, and they are organizing the world's army. Now, this situation is not inclusive only a great army, meaning a branch of the army. We're talking about military. During our time of the restoration period, it's not only army. Back then, in those times, what a person could have on land was a great army. But we know that the language of this time of the restoration period includes air, includes land, includes sea. So it explains that there is a huge dynamic going on. Now, staying on the Nile, it doesn't truly gives us the clues of what's coming in the near future. So then, International news. The great British newspaper, the British Post, has posted a very important information. China pushes for open world economy. That's the layer of trade. And there is a direct link then with the sons of Ishmael, the Arabs. Now, this government has decided to put a plug on the Arab oil. As a result of it, then the financial market evaluation and so on and so forth gave another rating for the Soviet Union. Understandable, of course. They put a plug in the East, then they try to work things in the West. But the point is, it goes so far. When then China finishes linking up the nations, then this plug is going to burst. And then the economies linked with the West, they're going to crash. They won't be able to come up again. So then why then truly is this way? Because the scriptures are already speaking of the trade of the time of the restoration period and the trade of the end. It comes from the East. Now there is a situation regarding then United States, or then the despised system. It's not truly despised, it's simply weak. An economy that has failed. But then later on, because of the activities with the Kingdom of the South, and there is Africa, then the economy recuperates. Now we can waste our resources on military and go in areas in the Middle East that will make a bit of change, or we can make a deal with the Soviets, let them handle the Middle East, and then we link up ourselves with Africa and help African economies become stronger, and then using our money as a means of exchange. So there are decisions that must be made, and then later on then speaks of a covenant, and then speaks of movements of armies from the north towards the south and vice versa. I try to understand the translation, the Greco-Roman translation of this particular section. Some portions do not speak of the kingdom of the north, but northbound, so as southbound, rather than the kingdom of the north and then kingdom of the south. Translation was wrong. They didn't understand the layer of the military. They had no clue what they were writing, because they had no structuring when they were translating. And the greatest example is Revelation. You find sections of one situation and sections of another situation, another chapter, and even a regular person studying language says, how come there is this topic and then jumps to the other topic and then goes to the other topic? I don't have any link. No, of course, they were translated wrong. They did not know how to layer them. So then, as far as this particular section of the instructions, it is absolutely certain that the Cold War is back, and greater than the former. So if it was back then active, you can understand what it was back then, plus more than what it was before. So then, let's be prepared for it. Let's make sure we don't stay on denial. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.